Let's get to Brett McMurphy, Action HQ, Action Network HQ. He, of course, one of our guests that when there's something we need to know about in college athletics even deeper than what sometimes we might have, it's Brett McMurphy who joins us on 365 Sports early today. Brett, we were going to discuss Florida State, and we will, but then last night the Pac-12 story that popped for Oregon State, Washington State, and the other 10. Is this an obvious win for Oregon State and Washington State?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, financially that was the big sticking point, and that's important for them going forward and whatever they may do. So, the fact that they, have control of the majority of the revenue, from the league is good news for them. Now, it's the good news. Now, the bad news is they've got to figure out what to do, and it's not an easy solution. Do you try to rebuild the league, and that means bringing in teams from the Mountain West in future seasons? Or do you do some type of merger with the Mountain West? Or do you try to, latch on to one of the other Power Four conferences, which is probably, they never say never, but I would think, I don't know. At this point right now, I don't think that's realistic just because of the geography. And I know geography doesn't matter in college sports anymore, but they are kind of outliers up there in the left corner of the map. So, but the good news is they can move forward and try to figure out what they can do. And certainly they've already announced their schedule for 2024. That was huge. And then, I think these next 2 years will be very telling and kind of show what's going to happen with them, starting in 2026 when we get the new 12-team format to the playoff and maybe the conferences settle down a little bit by that time.
So, Brett, Florida State with this big meeting today, a lot of reports out there this week on this probably coming down the pipeline sooner rather than later, and here we are on Friday right before Christmas break, and we're going to learn something from Florida State today. What are your expectations, and just what do you make of the timing and just the pursuit itself by Florida State to try and see what can be done here with this grant of rights?
Yeah, well, I reported yesterday that, this is something Florida State's been talking about with its key stakeholders for over a year. And, there was some consideration to actually do this before the season. But then ultimately they decided they didn't want to be a distraction of the football team if they made this kind of announcement. So they wanted to wait until after the football season. I know some people have reported, because of the college football playoff snub, that was the last straw. This drove FSU over the edge. I don't believe that. That's not true. What it did though is it maybe, sped up the process a little bit. They're not going to, what I think happens today, and the meeting starts in 15 minutes. Their board of trustees, they'll all get up there and they'll talk about how great Florida State is and how much the disparity of revenue is between the ACC and the SEC and the Big Ten, and how much value Florida State has as a TV market and brand and all those good things, which we've heard them say in the past 6 months, when I've talked to you guys, when they've had these meetings. The difference is, I believe, and I've been told that at some point they've threatened that they're going to leave the ACC. They've said that publicly in the past. I don't think today they're going to say we're leaving the ACC. I think they're going to somehow say that they are now give their president, their athletic director, their legal department, whatever, the authority to start pursuing what exactly it would take to leave the ACC. So I think people that are expecting them to come out and say, we're leaving the ACC, here's our notice, it may happen. I'd be shocked if it did. So I think it's more to kind of officially start the process, although who are we kidding? They started this process a year ago. They made multiple trips to Greensboro, North Carolina to look at the ACC grant of rights. So they know everything they already know. But because of Florida Sunshine State laws, Florida State University bylaws, they've got to do this in a public setting. So that's what they'll do. But, it will be fascinating to see what happens. And, kind of as one source told me about this whole thing, is this is basically, this is the Oppenheimer-like ripple effect throughout college athletics. And it's not that because Florida State is such a hot property. I mean, certainly, there still is in question, does the Big Ten want him? Does the SEC want him? Potentially both of those conferences, may decide, you know what, we're good where we are. That's a real possibility. However, if Florida State and their legal team can figure a way out of the grant of rights, which goes on for another 10 more years, then that's where you have the Oppenheimer-like ripple effect, because then you will have a mass exodus out of the SEC it would be quicker to list who probably wouldn't get an invite somewhere else. Not probably Boston College, Wake Forest, Syracuse, but pretty much everybody else would look to scatter and find higher ground in either the Big Ten, the SEC, and also the Big 12 could be a possibility.
Brett, do you really believe that Florida State could find itself? I know you just mentioned it, but I mean, do you really think that they would move forward here without, I guess, figuring that they've got a landing spot somewhere? And do you really think that if they were to become available in the sense that they're able to be moved, that the SEC and Big Ten, both one of those, really wouldn't have an interest in a brand like that?
Well, I can give you both sides of that. The Big Ten certainly wants to get in the state of Florida. As much as you think Ohio State and Michigan have a rivalry, I've got a bigger rivalry in college sports. The biggest rivalry in all of college sports right now, and that's ESPN versus Fox.
Yeah.
And you're laughing. I'm not. I know I joke a lot.
Yeah.
I'm dead serious. And so here's the kind of the predicament here. Fox and the Big Ten would love to get into Florida. If, you gave Greg Sankey some truth serum, and you probably don't even need to give it to him, he doesn't want to add Florida State. Florida State does nothing for the SEC. It's a big brand. It comes in. It can boost their football product. But they already have the state of Florida. They're fine. However, they don't want the Big Ten to come into Florida. Mm-hmm. ESPN certainly does not want Fox to plant their flag in Florida. So if you're the SEC, do you kind of say, well, we need to take Florida State so the Big Ten doesn't get down here and start, recruiting even more when you've got a team or teams in the state. So that's kind of what to keep an eye out on, or kind of what's being discussed behind the scenes. But for the Big Ten, certainly, for them, they truly are a national conference. They'll be in LA, Seattle, Washington, D.C., the Midwest. And now they can get into New York, now they can get into Florida. That would be huge for them. But then you've got 18 member schools with the new additions. So if you're not in the top 4 or 5 schools right now, do you really want to add Florida State? Because now you're shuffling down one more spot on the totem pole. Mm-hmm. Your road to the college football playoff, which is probably unlikely, just got even more tougher. Your road to getting to 6 wins and being bowl eligible is also going to be tougher now. Is it worth whatever more money you're going to get by bringing in Florida State? Worth it? At some point, this is what these schools need to decide. And again, keep in mind, before the Big Ten added Oregon and Washington, I talked to Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti at Big Ten Media Days, and he flat out told me, we have no interest in expansion. None, zero. It's not on the front burner, the back burner. We're fine where we're at. Fast forward 2 weeks, and they're adding Oregon and Washington. So things can change that quickly. And he was being honest with me. That's the unknown is, how much difference it would make for the Big Ten to add in a Florida State, a Miami, potentially a Clemson. I do think as far as the SEC, I don't think the SEC goes beyond 16 unless the Big Ten is going to go beyond 18. If the Big Ten, it's almost a game of chicken. If the Big Ten stays pat, then the SEC stays pat. So I guess your original question, does Florida State make this move if they're not guaranteed somewhere to go? I believe they do. They believe they have a way out of the grant of rights. We will find out. Their legal team, certainly that would be a long process. And they feel like that when they are available and they're out of the grant of rights, that they will have options for either the Big Ten or SEC. And if neither one of those conferences are a possibility, then certainly the Big 12 would make overtures to the FSU. The biggest sticking point with that is, how do you make the money worth it for Florida State, which is going to be paying hundreds of millions of dollars to get out of the ACC?
Brett, last question, because I know that meeting is about to start and you want to be all in the middle of it, is if Florida State does this, and let's say they move forward, but they don't win or they can't get out of it, is the ACC in a position where they could penalize them?
I guess penalize them. I'm not sure what exactly they could do. They can't really withhold. I don't believe they can withhold. I haven't seen the grant of rights, but right. I don't believe they would be able to. It doesn't seem like they would be able to withhold revenue from them. That's really the only way you penalize schools anymore, is financially. So I don't know necessarily if they could penalize them that way. If you're trying to get out of a contract and you're not able to do so, I guess it would be penalty enough. You're going to have egg on your face the entire time you remain in that conference. I would be surprised if there would be a financial penalty there. Certainly, again, whether they like it or not, Florida State's their biggest brand. Yep. They're their biggest TV draw. So I don't know necessarily what they would want to do. And no surprise. That's why they added Cal, Stanford, and SMU, because they've got their deal with ESPN. If they drop below 15 schools, including Notre Dame, ESPN can renegotiate the contract. And so that's kind of why they backfilled at those schools, because they realized that, potentially Florida State and other schools would be leaving or would be trying to leave. And they wanted to get some Power 5 schools now, as opposed to waiting in a year or two when they leave. And then there's no Power 5 schools available. And then you're scrambling to grab teams from the American or Sun Belt or JUCO ranks or wherever in the world you're going to find teams at this point. But it's, I don't know how much I've helped you. There's a lot of unknowns. Mm-hmm. I think, this morning we'll find out how serious Florida State is. Is it just a bunch of posturing and beating their chest about, well, we got screwed in the playoff and now we're really, really, really serious about looking into this? Or are they going to say, we're starting the process of actively finding a path out of the ACC? That's two big differences, because up to this point, they've talked a big game. And now today we're going to find out if it's more talk or they're actually going to take some action, or at least start the process of doing this. And one final thing, if they do have to give a year's notice. So if they go ahead and go through with this, whether it's today, whether it's next August when they notify the ACC, the earliest they would be able to get out and go to a new league would be July 1st, 2025.
And Brett, last thing for me. So the Big 12, do you think they just are sitting back right now, just letting things fall where they fall before they, try to, I guess, figure out too much, because there are so many unknowns? I mean, they're the league that was on death's door, and now they've seen the Pac die. The ACC's got a fire going on in the basement. Are they just, Brett Yormark and company, kind of sitting back and surveying at this point?
They're probably trying to deliver firewood to that base.
Yeah, probably right. Yeah.
Great.
Basically, they're the Big 12 is just sitting back and seeing what happens, because, like I said, if Florida State gets out, I would think Florida State would find a home in one of the two behemoths, the Big Ten or the SEC. But then, there will be resulting more moves. And, as we've talked about, when I've talked with you guys in the past, there's some teams that make a lot of sense. Also, geography wise, which I know doesn't matter anymore, but certainly like a Louisville or Pitt, and other schools that would make sense to the Big 12. So I think the Big 12 sitting back, the Big 12, does not have the financial, resources of the as far as media rights, as far as the Big Ten and SEC. So they're just sitting back. But yeah, again, if Florida State and others find a way out of the grant of rights, then the Big 12 will benefit. And will that be one team? Will that be 4 teams? Will that be 6 teams? I mean, it's impossible to say. And anyone right now that says they know, they're absolutely lying, because folks of the Big 12 don't know, because they're waiting to see how this shakes out.
Brett, thank you very much for jumping in early with us today. Enjoy, I guess, what we're about to find out, if much of anything other than saber rattling. Florida State about to start their meeting. Brett McMurphy, Action Network HQ. We always appreciate your time, and Merry Christmas, sir. This is 365 Sports. Okay, so, yeah.